In this video, we're going to break down my reaction to the Project Veritas Pfizer leak. We're going to identify potential holes, but we're also going to identify the most concerning issue out of all of this in this video. Let's get started. That's bullshit. That's like lying to you, right? I mean, that's straight up lying to you. It's like, no, we don't do that, but we do that. It's gotten a lot of attention. But I'm actually extremely frustrated by where it is not getting the attention that it actually rightfully deserves. And it has to do with Project Veritas and the Pfizer story. Now, in the past, Project Veritas has done both great things and not so great things. I say that up front because I want to be very clear here that even though in what I'm about to say, I support what Veritas is doing, I think there are some things that they could do better. Even in this case here, and hopefully some of that advice will translate over to them. But in addition, if what they've uncovered is true, I really support what they're doing. And I want to be clear that my goal is to go into this as neutrally as possible. So basically, Project Veritas set up the potential grinder date between an unnamed reporter and this individual here. And this individual on camera here is allegedly a director of research at Pfizer. And the reason I say allegedly is actually because Project Veritas gives some limited information proving that this person works at Pfizer, but I think we need a little bit more confirmation. Now, I'm going to go through some of their evidence, and it's a bad look that Pfizer has not actually come out yet to say that this person either does or does not work for Pfizer. Because if the person didn't work at Pfizer, wouldn't Pfizer come out immediately and go, we don't know who that is. This is staged, right? So far, I'm heavily leaning in the direction of suggesting Project Veritas is probably right in suggesting this is a Pfizer employee. And again, we're going to go through their evidence in just a moment. And what really shocks me, and I want to say this up front, what really shocks me is that the mainstream media is not covering this. The only people covering this are small media channels. The Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Washington Post, none of them are covering Project Veritas's work on this. And I think that's a disgrace. Because at bare minimum, cover it and address where the potential holes are, right? And I've already kind of given the biggest hole. The biggest hole is, do we for sure know that this person did indeed work at Pfizer? We know that they end up labeling that this person works at Pfizer, but we don't have that fact, right? We don't have that that absolute proof. But I do think that mainstream media should be covering this, but they're not. And that makes me very concerned that we need to be even more skeptical of mainstream media. Why is it that, and I'm not tinfoil hat, okay? I'm like definitely I don't think I'm tinfoil hat. But why is it not being covered? That makes me concerned. And it makes me skeptical. At least, again, cover it and then say like, hey, these are unsubstantiated, but this is what they're saying. But there's zero coverage at all. And we know Pfizer's got lots of money. We also know that the Wall Street Journal editorial board just had one of their members, not even the full Wall Street Journal editorial board, but just one of their members came out and talked about, hey, maybe the bivalent booster shot is not a good idea. Maybe the bivalent booster shot is not safe, and maybe it's way less effective than the CDC and FDA actually suggested it would be. And then they ended up themselves proving it's not that safe and effective, right? Only one member of the Wall Street Journal editorial board got published saying that. So I think there's a really big issue with mainstream media remotely criticizing Big Pharma. And that's bad, because if mainstream media is scared of Big Pharma, then we don't get the coverage we deserve as Americans or people in the world, really. Everybody would benefit from that. So I'm not going to go through all of this, but I'm going to play a little bit of this, and then I'm going to add some of my reactions and commentary. So we'll jump around a little bit in this. Let's go ahead and play some of it.
about mutating COVID?
Well, that is not what we say to the public. No, don't tell anyone this. You gotta publish, don't tell anyone. You gotta publish, don't tell anyone. Okay? We're exploring, like, now, you know how the virus keeps mutating?
Yeah.
Well, one of the things we're exploring is, like, why don't we just mutate it ourselves so we can create unfavorably develop new vaccines, right? So we have to do that. If we're gonna do that, though, there's a risk of, like, as you could imagine, no one wants to be having a pharma company mutating viruses. To be, like, very controlled to make sure that this virus mutate doesn't create something that, like, it goes everywhere.
Something crazy.
Is the way that the virus started and moving on. To be honest, like it makes no sense that this virus popped out of nowhere and like.
All right, so let's break this down because there's a lot of information to break down here, and there's a lot to understand about how well some of the science involved. I'm not a scientist, but I'm going to do my best. So the first thing that you have to understand is the difference between genetic engineering and gain of function. This becomes very, very important because Fauci, for example, said in a video in congressional testimony that no, we don't use gain of function research, but then there have been links to Fauci actually potentially being aware of gain of function research happening at labs like the Wuhan lab in China, which some say there are links, and there may be, I didn't research this part, so I want to be clear about that, but there may be links to US funding to that Wuhan lab, right? Anyway, this is also where Elon Musk has come out and suggested, oh, Fauci knew, Fauci lied, prosecute Fauci. Elon suggested that. I don't think Elon should really be like going that far in terms of making those allegations. Let other people make those allegations, and then maybe reply like, oh, like he does with the curious face, or like, this deserves investigation. Like, that's fine. Like, bring attention to it. But, when you go too political, especially when you're trying to attract advertisers from a business CEO point of view, bad idea for the purposes of business. That's not saying it's a bad idea for the purposes of humanity, right? Again, I'm a big fan of Elon bringing attention to things. But he's also kind of got to consider that, hey, wait a minute, like, we don't want to bankrupt Twitter, because guess what? If you bankrupt Twitter, and this is where I know a lot of people are like, Kevin, if the most powerful person in the world can't say it, why should he self-silence himself? I'm like, I'm not. I'm trying. I want Twitter to be preserved, because Google actually and YouTube are removing this content from the internet. That's why I'm not going to play all of it, because they're removing this. They're censoring this. And I don't think that's right. And so I'm not going to play the whole thing, obviously, but I want to comment on it and bring it to the attention of everyone. But I believe that if Twitter goes bankrupt, you actually lose more free speech than if it stays alive, right? So I think there's like this duality of like, bring attention to issues and let them get shared, but don't make advertisers run away from you, Elon, because we need Twitter, right? So big fan of free speech, obviously. We need Twitter. Okay, so now we have to understand a little bit about the difference between gain of function and genetic engineering. So genetic engineering is pretty simple. Genetic engineering can be done through crossbreeding, for example, watermelons, where to some degree you want seedless watermelons. You just basically only breed watermelons without the big black seeds, and they get smaller and smaller and smaller over time. That's how you get sort of seedless watermelons, right? But that's sort of more like, some people would say that's not even genetic engineering anymore. Another form of genetic engineering would be this is probably more genetic engineering for the main purposes here, is you take DNA and then maybe you slice out a corrupt portion of DNA that maybe gives a person asthma, for example. And instead you insert the proper base pairs that remove that defect strain of DNA, that defective strain, and now maybe somebody's asthma is cured. That has not actually happened yet in humans, but those are the goals of genetic engineering. Obviously, humans and human biology is substantially more complicated because your DNA is replicating thousands of times, probably per second, in your body, and this is very complicated to try to reprogram your whole body. It's kind of like once you have it, you're probably stuck for a while, at least into the future. With a virus, it's a lot easier because you're talking about essentially a single-cell organism, and you can manipulate the DNA of a virus to maybe do different things. Now, it's one thing if you manipulate a virus and you take out its ability to infect other things, right? Now what you're actually doing is you're reducing the virality of a virus. You're making that virus less capable. Well, that's different from gain of function. So you can do genetic engineering without making a virus worse, right? Now, to some degree, genetic engineering is used to manipulate viruses So that way, okay, maybe if you evolve into this, we already have a vaccine for that. You evolve into that, we already have a vaccine for that. Obviously, there's a profit motive to genetic engineering, because if viruses can be engineered in such a way that we kind of know which way they're going to evolve, and you can create vaccines for those, and the people who want to take those will then end up taking those and buying those, then Pfizer could potentially make more money, right? Ultimately, it all goes back to money. That's obvious. And I don't think anybody who's a capitalist is opposed to people making money. We're opposed to people lying to us, okay? That's bad. Or doing really bad things, like potentially gain of function. So what is gain of function? Gain of function is also a genetic modification, but it's a genetic modification that allows a virus to literally gain a function. So think about it like a tool that it didn't previously have. So think about that kind of like a human virus that doesn't infect cats, but it's now genetically modified to where now all of a sudden it can infect cats. Now the virus has gained a function. It can now infect something it previously couldn't. And the belief is that through the Wuhan lab leak theory of how COVID got out, that gain of function research was being used, and this basically COVID, the original strain of COVID and Delta or whatever, all stemmed from a lab leak, because gain of function research was maybe being operated on viruses that only affected bats, but now was engineered to infect humans, and then it got out. Oops, now you have a COVID pandemic and a disaster. So this is why gain of function has received a really, really, really bad reputation. And everybody pretty much politically says it doesn't happen. It probably does happen. And that could be intentional or unintentional. Because again, if you're genetically engineering, at some point you're going to accidentally create gain of function. It's, in my opinion, it's kind of like saying like, oh yeah, no, we don't do gain of function. We just do genetic modifying. But then, oops, we accidentally happen to provide a function gain to a virus. So I think that's kind of useful to know. I think it's also useful to know that in 2010, a federal jury awarded $1.37 million in damages to a former Pfizer scientist who claimed that she was sickened by a genetically engineered virus at a company lab. The closing facts of that case actually were pretty damning, showing that she was basically ignored. Her concerns about health and safety and improper ventilation and a broken vent hood were ignored, and that now she suffers from partial paralysis occasionally and a potassium disorder, and that when she addressed this issue with her bosses and supervisors, she was threatened that if she brought light to these issues, she would just receive bad performance reviews. She ended up getting fired, didn't return to work, sued, won $1.37 million in damages over this. So Pfizer has not had the best reputation for, health and safety over profit, which again, not a surprise. I think the biggest surprise is the mainstream media's unwillingness to cover this sort of story. So what we have here is the title of this Jordan Tristan Walker guy, Pfizer Director of Research and Development, Strategic Operations, and mRNA Scientific Planning. That is Veritas's claim, right? The big concern that I have is how do we verify that the person actually worked at Pfizer? And Project Veritas has started releasing some of that evidence. For example, this, breaking. A new Pfizer insider just sent me an image of Jordan Tristan Walker's internal Microsoft Teams profile showing he's still an active employee of the pharmaceutical giant. If you have more information, contact us. Now, as an outsider, this looks pretty damning, right? We see the at Pfizer. If you see the prior screenshots Project Veritas has put up as well, like Spookio profiles showing the potential for an at Pfizer, it all kind of aligns that this person probably did end up working at Pfizer. The person's LinkedIn profile has disappeared. But what bothers me a little bit, and I just want to make it clear, is I wish that before Project Veritas released their video, I wish they would have fully documented everything they could have gotten their hands on about the person and how they're linked to Pfizer, like full LinkedIn profile, any kind of documentation that this person works from Pfizer, and put a little bit more effort into that. Because then I think it would have, if they could without a doubt prove that this person actually worked for Pfizer, which so far I'm inclined to believe, then maybe it could have finally gotten the mainstream media to wake up and cover this. because I think that's sort of the biggest crime, is that the mainstream media isn't covering this, and instead it's basically being censored and buried. So I'm concerned about that story, and I'm most concerned about the fact that this individual, which I won't play that part of the video, but when it sort of gets discovered that he's being filmed, he freaks out. There's a tussle. He grabs O'Keefe's iPad when O'Keefe ends up confronting him as the person on the date goes away, grabs the iPad, throws it, gets locked in, the police. It's just a complete disaster. We're not going to play all of that. But my bottom line take out of all of this is that I actually think it's a great thing that there are companies like Project Veritas that are covering this sort of stuff, because now it's going to push for more transparency. First of all, it demands responses from Pfizer. And Pfizer has two choices. They can either, well, actually, they have three choices. They can address it and admit the person worked there and fire them, and then say that, hey, like, you know, clarify, like, this is what we do. Maybe we do engineering, but we don't do gain of function, right? Like, that's really all they'd have to do. And at least it would do some damage control. But right now, they're completely silent. They're silent because the mainstream media isn't covering it. And that's the scariest part, is that the mainstream media isn't covering it. And their silence is kind of like, so he does and you do, right? Like, that's bad. And then, of course, the other option is saying, no, this person doesn't work here. We're being set up. That person's never worked here. Those are fake screenshots or whatever. That's the other option too, right? And so that's why I'm trying to take as much of a neutral POV here, because you've even got Marco Rubio sending like demand letters now, saying, look, Pfizer, you need to respond to this, which they should. They should respond to this. But I understand they might also have that POV of like, oh, well, you know, if we respond to it, it's just going to bring more attention to the issue. Personally, what I'm seeing here does not look good. It, first of all, looks very bad for how in bed the mainstream media and pharma probably is. Almost certainly is. And it certainly doesn't look good that there hasn't been a response from Pfizer yet, because it does sort of imply that, yeah, the person probably did work at Pfizer, or maybe still does. And you know, what the person was saying was kind of alarming. So it'd be nice to have a little bit more insight into that, because I think the biggest allegation out of all of it was, and even though it was cut up in a way where it probably seems a little bit more damning, you can't cut up the part where he says, well, that's not what we say publicly, right? People don't want to hear that. That's scary. That's kind of like Twitter saying, oh, we don't shadow ban people. We just visibility filter people. That's bullshit. That's like lying to you, right? I mean, that's straight up lying to you. It's like, no, we don't do that, but we do that. And that's the biggest concern. And so I'm glad that more attention is coming to this. And there's certainly more to come on this. But I absolutely wanted to bring attention to this, because I think it's very important.